Have you ever wondered why the Vatican and Europe banned the Book of Enoch from the Bible, but a single church in Africa protected this text with its own life for millennia? Today I'm going to show you what they were trying to hide, the story of the Watchers, beings who descended from the heavens, transmitted forbidden technologies, and left a lineage that the system doesn't want you to recognize. If you have the courage to cross the apocryphal scriptures with the secrets kept by the African continent, leave your like and subscribe to the channel. Stay with me until the end, because what they taught you about the beginning of the world is incomplete. The narrative of the rebellious angels, or Watchers, who descended to earth and mixed with humans, is deeply rooted in sacred texts and oral traditions around the world. In Genesis, the mention of the sons of God joining the daughters of men suggests a hybridization, resulting in the Nephilim, beings of extraordinary strength and stature. This idea is expanded upon in the Book of Enoch, an apocryphal text that details how 200 angels, led by Samyaza, descended on Mount Hermon, sealing a pact to share forbidden knowledge with humans such as metallurgy, astrology, and the use of medicinal roots. These angels, when united with human women, generated offspring that would be the origin of the famous giants of antiquity. It turns out that these narratives are not limited to the Middle East or the Western world. In African oral traditions, similar stories emerge, describing beings who came from the stars or the sky, bringing with them wisdom and technology far beyond human understanding at the time. Although these stories are often seen as mythological, they bear an uncanny resemblance to biblical and apocryphal accounts. In cultures such as the Dogons in Mali, there are legends of ancestors who came from a distant star system, bringing knowledge about the cosmos that has only recently been corroborated by modern science. Facts reveal that Africa is often cited as the cradle of humanity, where the first civilizations flourished. It is in this context that the intriguing question arises: if the Watchers and the Nephilim really existed, is it possible that their lineages have endured through the African peoples? History shows that Africa was the scene of events of cosmic and spiritual magnitude, and many of its ancient cultures speak of kings and rulers who possessed extraordinary abilities, perhaps reminiscent of these ancient lineages. Archaeological evidence points to civilizations in Africa that possessed advanced knowledge in mathematics, architecture, and astronomy, knowledge that some believe originated in interactions with these celestial beings. While mainstream tradition often dismisses these stories as myths, what few realize is that they may contain fragments of an ancient truth that we do not yet fully understand. Research demonstrates that African oral traditions have a remarkable ability to preserve history through the ages, often maintaining information that has been lost or altered in written traditions. This raises a fascinating question. If African traditions are a continuation of this ancient narrative, what does this reveal about our understanding of human history and spirituality? As we look at these narratives with new understanding, we are led to consider the impact of these beings on the formation of the first human societies and to ponder the true scope of their legacy. Could these ancestors, venerated and respected in oral traditions, be more than just myth? The question remains: if these lineages exist today, where are their descendants? And more importantly, what role do they play in the web of human history? The truth is that the Book of Enoch is more than just an ancient text. He is a window into a world where the divine and the human intertwined in ways that defied common understanding. This book, found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, reveals a narrative of rebellious angels, known as Watchers, who descended to earth and forever altered the course of human history. In the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition, Enoch is not just a historical account, it is a living scripture, a centerpiece of your spiritual identity, preserved in its entirety when many other traditions have relegated it to oblivion. This in itself is already an indication of the importance that this text has in understanding the lineages that crossed paths with humanity. What few realize is that the Book of Enoch details the arrival of 200 angels led by Azazel and Semjaza, who settled on Mount Hermon. This event marked the beginning of an era of forbidden knowledge, where secrets from heaven were handed over to humans. Metallurgy, for example, allowed the manufacture of weapons that transformed peaceful societies into militarized ones. Cosmetics, on the other hand, introduced concepts of beauty and power that influenced entire dynasties. Furthermore, astrology and stargazing not only changed the way humans viewed the universe, but also laid foundations for modern astronomy. This transfer of knowledge, according to Enoch, was a catalyst for the unnatural development of civilizations, an advance that came at a profound spiritual and moral cost. Evidence indicates that the flood, mentioned not only in the Bible, but in various cultures around the world, was a divine response to these transgressions. In the context of the Book of Enoch, the flood was not just a natural catastrophe, but an act of purification designed to eradicate the corrupting influences of the Nephilim and restore balance to the earth. Reality shows that these narratives, far from being merely mythological, have parallels in African traditions that speak of great floods and gods who brought order after chaos. Historical records show that the connection between the Watchers and the African continent does not end with the narrative of Enoch. The preservation of the text by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church suggests a deep affinity and perhaps a spiritual lineage that endures to this day. It is important to remember that Africa, since time immemorial, has been a cradle of civilizations that demonstrated advanced knowledge in various areas, something that could have roots in these ancient teachings of the Watchers. So what does this link between the Book of Enoch and African traditions tell us about the spiritual history of humanity? Could it be that these Watcher lineages not only survived, but flourished among African cultures, influencing their histories and mythologies? What if these stories are more than just legends, but rather fragments of a greater truth that we still seek to understand? The question remains, can we unravel the full impact of these celestial beings on the tapestry of human history? After the flood, the canonical narrative treats the Nephilim as a distant memory, but the apocryphal texts tell an intriguing story full of implications. In the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees, the Nephilim did not simply disappear. Their spirits, without physical bodies, roamed the earth, influencing the world in new and mysterious ways. These texts suggest that although the bodies of the giants were destroyed, their spiritual essences continued to impact humanity, a hidden but potent legacy that shaped civilizations. Historical records show that among the survivors of the flood, the lineages of Noah's sons, especially through Ham, perpetuated the legacy of the Nephilim. Cush, Noah's grandson, is a central figure in this narrative, especially in northeast Africa. The region where their descendants settled is associated with great civilizations that emerged after the flood. The Ethiopian tradition keeps records that speak of an ancestral wisdom transmitted through generations, which could have its roots in this primordial connection. Nimrod, famous for building the Tower of Babel, is often cited as a direct descendant of Cush, highlighting a power and knowledge that the canonical texts do not detail, but that the apocryphal attributes to an inheritance from the Watchers. It turns out that apocryphal texts not only speak of destruction and loss, but also of the transmission of knowledge. Before the flood, the Watchers had taught humans arts and sciences, and this knowledge was not completely lost. Cush's descendants are portrayed as masters of abilities that transcended time. The civilizations they founded in northeast Africa, such as Aksum and Cush, bear witness to a past that apocryphal texts illuminate in surprising detail. Studies indicate that modern archaeology, when exploring these regions, often finds traces of technologies and wisdom that do not match the accepted historical time. It is as if a continuous thread of knowledge, begun with the Watchers, has permeated these cultures, transforming them into centers of power and innovation. What's more, the figure of Nimrod as a powerful kingdom builder suggests that the abilities of the Nephilim could manifest themselves in unexpected ways through their human descendants. The facts reveal that the canonical Bible and apocryphal texts trace divergent paths, but both point to an Africa rich in history and spirituality. Cush's lineage, rich in tradition and mystery, seems to carry within it not only the fragments of a time before the flood, but traces of a power that defies modern understanding. This narrative forces us to reconsider Africa's role in human history, not only as the cradle of humanity, but also as a repository of knowledge that has survived catastrophes and purifications. Divine. So while the official biblical story suggests an end for the Nephilim with the flood, apocryphal texts and archaeology offer us a more complex and rich vision where the threads of history intertwine with legends and hidden truths. Do the shadows of the Nephilim still walk among us across African cultures? The question remains, what really survived the flood, and what is the true legacy that still influences the modern world? How is it possible that ancient civilizations, in times where technology was supposedly rudimentary, possessed knowledge so advanced that it still defies our understanding today? The texts of the Book of Enoch offer an intriguing perspective that cannot be easily dismissed. The Watchers, rebellious, angels who, upon descending to earth, shared profound knowledge with humanity. This knowledge was not just theoretical, but a tangible practice that transformed entire societies. For example, Azazel taught the art of metallurgy and cosmetics, altering the dynamics of power and beauty among humans. Semjaza brought enchantments and sorcery, opening doors to the spiritual world and its influences. Reality shows that ancient African civilizations have indelible marks of this advanced knowledge. The pyramids of Egypt, which are not just funerary monuments but complex astronomical alignments, suggest an understanding of mathematics and geometry that is still difficult to replicate today. The pyramids of Meroe in Sudan and the observatories of Nabta Playa, dating back millennia, reveal a level of sophistication in observing the stars that should not have been present in so-called primitive societies. These advances suggest external intervention, or at the very least, an evolutionary leap in human intellectual development, which texts about the Watchers could explain. Evidence also points to the Ifa system of the Yoruba, with its 256 Odu, covering practically the entire human experience. This system does not seem to be the result of a slow and cumulative evolution, but rather of a complete revelation, preserved and transmitted over the centuries. This revelation could be an echo of the teachings passed down by the Watchers, knowledge that was carefully guarded and perpetuated by African cultures. Analysis indicates that the impact of the Watchers was not limited to the introduction of technologies, but also to the way humans perceived the world around them. Astrological knowledge, for example, not only helped in understanding the heavens, but also influenced agricultural practices, sacred rituals, and even social organization. Mastery over enchantments and medicinal roots revolutionized traditional medicine, offering treatments and cures that seemed magical at the time. The facts reveal that the connection between the Watchers and African civilizations suggests a legacy that goes beyond myth, influencing the development of societies in aspects that modern academia still struggles to fully understand. While many African oral traditions keep these knowledges alive, the question remains: to what extent have these teachings shaped the course of human history, and what more can be revealed if we look beyond the surface of the myths and legends? The search for these answers could redefine our understanding of the past and the role that the African continent plays in the tapestry of global civilization. Why do so many African cultures share legends of beings who came from the stars? Oral traditions, deeply rooted in African identity, keep memories of ancestors who descended from the sky, bringing knowledge and transformation. Among the Dogon of Mali, the legend of the Nomo, amphibious beings that descended from the stars, continues to intrigue researchers. Documents prove that the Dogon had advanced knowledge about the Sirius star system, especially Sirius B, which was only visible with Western telescopes in the 1970s. The reality shows that this ancestral wisdom, inexplicable to many, is a living testimony of a connection that transcends time and technology. What few realize is that the Yoruba also tell stories of interactions with cosmic forces, known as orixas. These are not just deities, but manifestations of cosmic energies that, according to oral traditions, have interacted with human beings in time immemorial. The orixas, each identified with forces of nature and aspects of human behavior, are seen as ancestors who left specific lineages, establishing a direct relationship between the human world and the divine. Research shows that this conception of deities associated with natural elements and cosmic forces is not just a cultural creation, but a continuity of ancestral knowledge that resonates with the narratives of the Watchers described in the Book of Enoch. Meanwhile, among the Bantu communities, the story of founding ancestors who came from other places, bringing with them knowledge about agriculture, medicine, and astronomy, reinforces the idea of contact with beings of non-terrestrial origin. Analysis indicates that these founding myths are not merely legends, but representations of events that marked the history of these communities. These reports, which speak of beings who established the first communities and introduced the wisdom of cultivation and relationship with the cosmos, reflect a collective memory that precedes any external or written influence. Evidence indicates that these traditions were not born in response to texts such as the Book of Enoch, but rather they reveal parallels that suggest a common origin or a deep cultural exchange. The similarity of African narrative structures to the stories of the Watchers and the Nephilim cannot easily be explained away as coincidence. It turns out that in all of these traditions, the idea of beings who descended from heaven to guide and teach humans is a constant raising questions about what these ancient cultures really experienced. Facts reveal that African oral traditions have been a powerful means of preserving history and wisdom over the centuries. What do they tell us about the history of humanity and our place in the universe? If these stories are more than myths, perhaps they contain truths about the interaction between the human and the divine that we do not yet fully understand. So, as we continue to explore these traditions, we are challenged to reconsider the impact of these celestial beings on the formation of our first societies. Could these memories be an echo of the ancient lineages of beings that walked among us? The question persists, and the search for answers continues to intrigue and inspire those who dare to look beyond the boundaries of established knowledge. The expression divine blood in African traditions and apocryphal texts is not merely symbolic. It represents a transmission of spiritual abilities and knowledge. When the Book of Enoch and other texts talk about lineages that carried something special due to their origin, they are referring to a connection with the sacred that transcends simple genetic inheritance. This concept finds parallels in Yoruba traditions, where Akse is understood as a vital force that not only flows, but is carefully transmitted through specific lineages. Akse is more than an energy. It is an essence that carries the wisdom of the ancestors and manifests itself in a unique way in their descendants. Yoruba tradition sees this as a direct link between past and present, a continuity of power that can be cultivated and expanded by those who possess it. Reality shows that the concept of Ori, which represents individual consciousness and destiny, also resonates with the idea of spiritual lineages described in texts about the Watchers. While Akse is the force that drives life and growth, Ori is the compass that guides each individual on their unique journey. Together, these ideas form a framework for understanding the role and potential of each individual within the community and the cosmos. In apocryphal texts, the Watchers began lineages that possessed special skills and knowledge, and this transmission of abilities and understanding of the sacred is something that resonates strongly in African traditions. Studies indicate that in the Yoruba worldview, Akse and Ori are not abstract concepts, but an integral part of spiritual and social practices. Rituals and ceremonies are designed to honor and strengthen these forces, ensuring that the lineage continues to prosper. This continuity is crucial, as each new member of the community not only inherits physical characteristics, but also the responsibility for maintaining and expanding the spiritual and cultural legacy. This transmission of knowledge and power is seen as a gift and a responsibility, reflecting what apocryphal texts describe as the mission of the Watcher lineages, to preserve and transmit divine knowledge. The facts reveal that both in African traditions and in apocryphal texts, there is the idea that certain individuals or groups have a closer connection with the sacred, a lineage that gives them a special role in society. This vision is not about racial superiority, but about capability and responsibility. Just as the Watchers chose to share their knowledge with humanity, African lineages are seen as guardians of wisdom and power, responsible for maintaining harmony between the human and spiritual worlds. History reveals that over the generations, these lineages maintained traditions and practices that guaranteed the survival and cultural and spiritual flourishing of their communities. Today, as we explore these traditions, we can discover a depth of understanding about the interconnection between the human and the divine that resonates with accounts of the Watchers. The question that arises is, what is the true meaning of divine blood in our contemporary world, and how can we honor and integrate this legacy into our lives? How could a continent that carries a unique spiritual heritage have so many of its legacies erased from popular knowledge? The truth is that choices about what to preserve and what to suppress in historical and religious narratives are not accidental. When the Ethiopian Orthodox Church decided to keep the Book of Enoch as part of its canon, it made more than a theological choice. It was an affirmation of cultural and spiritual identity that resonated through the centuries. This book, which details the Watchers' interaction with humanity, was kept alive on African soil, while other Christian traditions dismissed it as apocryphal or heretical. This has not only silenced a significant part of spiritual history, but it has also disconnected African lineages from their extraordinary origins, transforming rich narratives into myths and disregarding their profound implications. It turns out that the preservation of the Book of Enoch by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church was not an isolated act, but part of a broader cultural resistance. On a continent where oral traditions have always been the main vehicle for transmitting knowledge, writing is just one of the ways to preserve history. These oral traditions, often dismissed as primitive superstitions by Western scholars, actually hold a depth of memory that defies simplistic interpretations. They speak of celestial beings and ancient knowledge passed down through generations, echoing the stories contained in the Book of Enoch and providing a continuity to these narratives that has been systematically downplayed or ignored in academies around the world. Research shows that the exclusion of the Book of Enoch from the Western canon was not only a theological decision, but also a political one. By marginalizing these stories, a gap was created in understanding how African civilizations saw themselves and connected with the divine. The impact of this suppression is vast. By removing these narratives from mainstream discourse, African lineages were stripped of their cosmic connections, and their origin stories were relegated to the category of folklore. This has had the effect of delegitimizing African traditions on a global stage, obscuring the rich tapestry of their history and culture. Documents prove that the Watchers' narrative, when preserved in Ethiopia, offered a version of history that valued the intersection between the heavenly and the earthly, a vision that not only enriched Ethiopian spirituality, but also offered an alternative perspective on human origin and destiny. Reality shows that while the West rejected these stories as myths, Africa maintained them as living truths, reflecting a broader and more inclusive conception of spirituality and human knowledge. Thus, when we look at the legacy of the Book of Enoch and its relationship to African traditions, we see a clear example of how history can be shaped by those who write and teach it. What was done with that memory is not just a matter of forgetting, but of deliberate choice about what to consider valid or true. History reveals that by reclaiming and acknowledging these narratives, we are not only honoring the past, but also reimagining our present. The question that remains is, how can we bring these stories back to the center of our collective understanding, allowing them to illuminate new paths for the future? Have you ever considered that modern science may just be beginning to understand what African spiritual traditions have been asserting for centuries? Epigenetics, an emerging field that studies how life experiences can influence gene expression without altering DNA sequence, is uncovering a complexity in information transmission that challenges the classical genetic model. This science shows us that traumatic events can leave biological marks on descendants who have never directly experienced such experiences. This phenomenon, known as transgenerational transmission of biological information, leads us to question, if traumas are transmitted in this way, what about extraordinary capabilities and access to elevated states of consciousness? The truth is that African traditions have always stated that certain spiritual connections, such as Akse, are inherited and passed down through generations. Akse, this vital force that connects the physical world to the spiritual, is not just a matter of personal choice, but an inheritance that manifests itself in certain families and lineages. This concept is surprisingly analogous to the principles that epigenetics is beginning to explore. While science still seeks to prove this transmission of spiritual abilities and connections, it already recognizes that something beyond DNA is at stake. Evidence points to the possibility that experiences of non-ordinary states of consciousness and connections with the sacred, observed in some African lineages, are more than simple cultural learning. Some families seem to have an almost instinctive access to these abilities, something that epigenetics could help explain. These spiritual transmissions, which African traditions have sustained for millennia, may have a biological basis that science is only beginning to understand. What few realize is that the texts about the Watchers, rebellious angels who interacted with humanity, also speak of a transmission of knowledge and skills that cannot be reduced to simple genetics. These celestial beings, by sharing forbidden secrets and wisdom, could have started lineages with spiritual capabilities that were perpetuated through generations. Epigenetics, by revealing how information can be passed non-genetically, opens a new window into understanding how these lineages may have preserved extraordinary abilities over time. African oral traditions and apocryphal texts, such as the Book of Enoch, have narrated stories of special connections with the divine that now gain a new perspective with epigenetics. These traditions assert that the connection with the Oryxars, for example, is something that is inherited and transmitted, a concept that modern science is just beginning to investigate. Epigenetics does not prove the existence of rebellious angels or divine connections, but it suggests that the transmission of spiritual abilities may be a more tangible reality than we imagine. So as science advances and begins to unravel the mysteries of epigenetic transmission, we are led to reconsider the truth behind African spiritual traditions and apocryphal texts. Do these stories, which speak of lineages with transcendental abilities, hold a truth that science is just beginning to discover? The question remains, if epigenetics can explain inherited trauma, could it also illuminate the transmission of spiritual gifts? Why are narratives about special lineages often used to justify oppressive hierarchies? History reveals that these narratives, instead of liberating, often serve to reinforce unequal power structures. However, the connection between the Watchers' stories and African traditions offers a unique perspective that challenges this trend. The Book of Enoch, contrary to what many might think, does not celebrate the supremacy of any lineage over another. Instead, it is a chronicle of responsibility and warning about the use of power. It turns out that the Watchers, rebellious angels who descended to Earth, are judged not simply by their decision to interact with humanity, but by the consequences of their actions. They brought knowledge that, when misused, resulted in oppression and destruction. The lesson here is not one of inherent greatness, but of caution and wisdom. What few realize is that this narrative deeply aligns with the best expressions of African spiritual traditions, which emphasize the responsibility that comes with Aksay, the vital force that permeates the universe. Aksay, in African traditions, is not merely a power to be explored. It is a sacred responsibility that must be used for the common good. This is evident in spiritual practices that teach that those who possess great Aksay should use it to heal, build, and uplift their communities, not to dominate or oppress. African oral traditions, which preserve the wisdom of ancient times, refute the idea that power confers the right to subdue. Instead, they extol the use of knowledge to promote collective well-being. The facts reveal that if there are lineages today that carry traces of these ancient narratives, their true mission is not to claim superiority. On the contrary, it is to use this heritage for a greater purpose, to transform knowledge and power into tools of justice, peace, and harmony. This responsibility is a recurring theme in African spiritual traditions, where the true leader is one who serves his people and uses his wisdom to benefit everyone. Evidence indicates that, throughout history, African people have demonstrated this understanding of power and responsibility in a remarkable way. From kings who ruled with justice to spiritual leaders who guided their communities with wisdom, Africa has been a continent where power is seen not as a right, but as a service. This is reflected in the way African spiritual traditions perceive the relationship between humans and the divine, where reciprocity and balance are fundamental. The question, then, is not about who holds power, but about how it is used. The legacy of the Watchers, when interpreted through the lens of African traditions, is not a call to superiority, but a potent reminder of the responsibility that comes with knowledge. The challenge is to use this wisdom to build a better world where everyone can prosper. Therefore, the true heritage of these narratives is one of service and responsibility, not hierarchy or domination. What will we do with this legacy? Have you ever wondered how ancestral memories can resist the relentless forces of time and oppression? The truth is that blood carries stories that the mind, for various reasons, can forget. In the case of African lineages, blood memory transcends the constraints imposed by colonizers and the systematic efforts to erase them. The Book of Enoch, guarded by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, is a living testimony to a history that refused to disappear. This text, which details the Watchers' interaction with humanity, was preserved on a continent that had already become a target for those seeking to dominate and rewrite spiritual narratives. It turns out that even in the face of attempted cultural erasure, African oral traditions continued to transmit the essence of these stories. They served as the true thread that connects the present to the past, bringing to light knowledge that defies the conventions of written history. While texts were labeled heretical and banned, song, dance, and rituals became the vehicles of resistance and preservation. Blood, therefore, becomes a means of communication, a spiritual heritage that pulses in every beat of the drum and in every word whispered in ancestral ceremonies. Evidence indicates that epigenetics begins to scientifically explain what traditions have always known. Events and experiences lived by our ancestors can leave lasting marks on their descendants. This emerging field of science offers insights into how memories and trauma are passed on, suggesting that inheritance goes beyond what the eye can see. This transmission of biological information may be the key to understanding how certain groups keep alive a spiritual connection that seems to defy time and induced forgetfulness. History reveals that over the centuries, African lineages have faced numerous attempts at cultural eradication. Generations have been indoctrinated to despise their roots, to consider their practices as primitive and worthless. However, there is a truth that neither time nor efforts at domination have been able to completely erase. Blood remembers, and this genetic memory is activated whenever someone connects with a part of themselves that seems older than any formal teaching. The facts reveal that recovering these stories is not just an act of resistance, but a necessity for those seeking to reconnect with an identity that has been denied to them. The memory of the Watchers, preserved in the Book of Enoch, resonates with African traditions, offering a glimpse of an era where the divine and the human walked together. This narrative, which mixes the celestial and the earthly, continues to inspire those who seek to understand their ancestry in depth. Reality shows that when someone of African origin feels an inexplicable attraction to rhythms, symbols, or forms of prayer, it is the blood that speaks. It is the memory that refuses to be silenced. So by embracing these traditions, we are not only celebrating a rich cultural tapestry, but also affirming that the stories of our ancestors still live within us. The question that arises now is, are we ready to listen to and honor these ancestral voices that blood incessantly reminds us of?